the effects of brain damage throughout life?
What are the effects of brain damage throughout life? So it depends on how significant that brain damage is. So in kids bounce back pretty fast, right? So it depends on when it happens. It also depends on how significant it is. So basically, when kids get a concussion, that's not something that you would typically see on any kind of like film or imaging. So if you come into the hospital and they take pictures of your head and they don't really see anything, but you have symptoms there, that would be a concussion. And typically kids have those symptoms for about 2-3 weeks. The key component to that is that you do things like brain rest, no texting, no cell phones. You don't jump back to school right away. What's the one time where we say hold off of school because you want your brain to rest, right? It's the same thing like when you sprain your ankle, you don't get immediately up and run around on it. It's a bad sprain to the brain. Some kids, though, have even more significant injuries, right? So sometimes when we take a picture of their head, you'll see that there's a bleed there, or there's something called shearing forces, which is basically when the head moves back and forth really fast and the brain moves inside of it. So those can have longer effects. And then kind of you have these other things that play into it. Sometimes when you have an effect like this, right, so you have a really bad traumatic brain injury and you have a bleed in your brain and you have a period where like you're not breathing on your own, it's so bad. So then you have an anoxic injury that plays into that. Those are typically the worst kind of injuries, and that's where it kind of changes a child's life. And from that on, they won't kind of be the same.
Okay. How can a helmet prevent brain damage?
So kind of exactly what it seems, right? If you wear a helmet and it's fit the right way, that's really important. Dr. McCain and I and some of the other people here do helmet fittings. If you wear a helmet the right way, basically when your head hits something, the helmet's gonna hit it first, right? And it's gonna protect your brain. So that's essentially how it works, as long as it's fitting right, and basically the helmet takes the impact.
Okay. And how can a bike helmet affect somebody's everyday life?
How can it affect someone's everyday ride? Just safety, right? That's the whole thing. We see so many kids out there when they're riding their bike, they'll have the bike helmet on the handle of the bike, and you're like, how is that's not helping you? By wearing a bike helmet, you never know when an accident's gonna happen. So we get a lot of accidents where kids are riding their bike and a car doesn't see them and the car hits the bike, right? And then they fall off. Basically, it's just protection for your head. It's making sure that, you know what I mean? When it's like wearing a seatbelt in the car. You get in the car and you put your seatbelt on. You get on the bike, you put your helmet on.
Okay, at this hospital, what injuries have you seen from kids and adults not wearing helmets?
All head injuries, right? So it's traumatic. It's traumatic brain injuries. We actually have a couple kids that are in the hospital now, and that's what happens is they're riding their bike. Typically someone hits them, like a car, and they basically hit their head hard enough on the ground or on the car that it causes their brain to bleed and swell very bad.
Why do you think kids don't wear helmets?
I think kids don't wear helmets because other kids don't wear helmets. It's like a you know what I mean, a mass effect type thing. I think if it's not something that somebody thinks is kind of cool to do, they won't wear it. So their parents will go out and buy them a helmet, but then they just put it on their bike handle and ride with it. The other thing is that we have to kind of really make sure, if you guys go on a family bike ride, your mom and dad should be wearing a helmet too, right? You kind of look at your parents as role models. So we want to make sure that adults out there are wearing bike helmets, so that if they wear bike helmets, you're more likely to wear it.
And last question.
Sure.
Do you agree with the statement that bike helmets are currently the best way to stay safe on a bike?
I do. I think bike helmets, I think there's a lot of things that need to go into kind of safety on a bike. I think you have to have reflectors. I think you have to know the rules of the road when you're riding a bike, right? Because there's cars around you, there's different things. So, riding in a safe place. I think riding when your parents are there type of thing, having somebody to supervise you. I think helmets make a big deal. When you think about it, the two things that are really, really important to your body, right, are your head and your heart. Those are the two things that kind of help blood flow, circulate blood, that your brain works to kind of help keep those things moving, the central nervous system. So those are pretty important things to kind of keep safe. So I definitely would put wearing a bike helmet in the top things to do to kind of keep safe. Okay.
And with the patients that you have here now, how many of those were wearing a helmet versus not?
None.
So
So that's the problem. I would say probably 95% of our patients that come in involved in some type of accident. it's because they're not doing the safety thing they should have been doing. They're not wearing their seatbelts. They're not wearing their seatbelt appropriately. For a younger kid or a kid that's under 80 pounds, right, and about 4 foot 9 inches, give or take, they're not in a booster. I know that's another thing. Sometimes kids don't want to be in boosters, but you know what? It's about keeping you safe and keeping you alive, right? Wearing helmets, wearing other safety gear. So there's a lot of times when we have kids that are skateboarding or different things and they're not wearing their knee pads and everything. I will say this, in sports related accidents, a lot of the times the football players and all of that, they actually are wearing their protective gear. It's just kind of the mechanism. A lot of times, you know, the way the protective gear works, if somebody hits them where it's not directly to the head, but it's like around their chest or abdomen area, it'll cause some major issues for them.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.